The morning of April 8, 1944, near Worth am Rhine in occupied France, Lieutenant Ralph Kit Carson, Jr., pushed the twin throttles of his Lockheed P-38J Lightning forward. The twin-boomed fighter, one of the most distinctive aircraft ever designed, bore the markings of the 20th Fighter Group, 55th Squadron, designation 42-68347. Its nickname, painted just below the left canopy, Slow Motion. Carson was returning from an escort mission accompanying B-17 flying fortresses, attacking industrial targets deep within German territory. His mission had gone successfully. Bombers had struck their targets, formations had remained relatively intact, and escorts had accomplished their primary objective, protecting the bombers from German fighter interception. The flight back toward England should have been routine, but in the fractured light of a spring morning, with fuel gauges reading lower than anticipated after extended combat maneuvers above 25,000 feet, Carson found himself separated from his squadron in deteriorating weather. Navigation error, a combination of cloud cover and unexpected wind, had disoriented him. What he believed was the Channel, the stretch of water separating occupied France from friendly England, lay ahead. He descended through the overcast, searching for landmarks that would reorient him. Below the clouds, the landscape revealed he had made a terrible miscalculation. Instead of the familiar coastline leading to friendly territory, unfamiliar terrain spread beneath him, German territory. Desperate for fuel, recognizing his navigation error had placed him in mortal danger, Carson spotted an airfield through a break in the clouds. What appeared to be a German military installation, with fuel reserves insufficient for the flight back to England, with no other viable options, Carson made the decision that would dramatically alter the course of German fighter development. He reduced power, lowered his landing gear, descended toward the airfield, and set down his P-38J Lightning on German-controlled soil. As the twin Allison engines wound down to silence, as German ground personnel surrounded his distinctive twin-boomed fighter, Carson climbed from the cockpit to face his captors. He had delivered one of America's most advanced and carefully guarded fighter aircraft directly into German hands, intact, fully functional, and ready for examination. Second Lieutenant Ralph Carson, Jr., would spend the remainder of the war as a prisoner of war, but his P-38J Lightning would embark on a journey that would profoundly shake German assumptions about American aircraft capabilities and force German engineers and pilots to confront design approaches that contradicted fundamental principles of Luftwaffe fighter development philosophy. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had been engaged in extended aerial combat against American and British forces for months. Intelligence reports about American fighters had accumulated throughout the preceding years. Fragmentary accounts from combat encounters, technical information derived from crash site examination, and second-hand reports from intelligence sources of varying reliability. What German Air Command desperately needed was comprehensive, systematic knowledge about the most advanced American fighters currently being deployed against German forces. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning represented the cutting edge of American single-seat fighter design. It had first flown in 1939, had entered service with the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1941, and by 1944, it constituted a significant portion of American fighter strength in both European and Pacific theaters. The aircraft's radical twin boomed. The configuration set it apart visually from every other fighter in the world. Where conventional fighters featured a single fuselage housing the pilot, engine, and armament, the P-38 positioned its twin Allison V1200 engines in separate booms connected by a central wing. The pilot sat in a central nacelle between the booms, with an unobstructed bubble canopy, providing exceptional visibility in all directions. Each engine boom mounted a landing gear member, eliminating the complex tricycle landing gear of conventional fighters. The armament consisted of 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm Hispano cannon, all mounted in the nose of the central nacelle around the pilot, creating unprecedented firepower concentration. The design reflected engineering thought from a company that had built reconnaissance aircraft, transports, and advanced experimental aircraft, bringing design philosophy from those experiences to fighter development. Lockheed engineers, led by Clarence Kelly Johnson, one of America's premier aircraft designers, had created an aircraft that embodied distinctly different priorities from conventional fighter design. Rather than minimizing weight and optimizing turn performance like German fighters, the P-38 maximized performance across a broad envelope, emphasized pilot survivability, and integrated the latest aeronautical research into practical design. The twin-boom configuration provided numerous advantages that German engineers would soon discover. The separation of engines into individual booms meant loss of a single engine would not result in catastrophic handling problems. The large rudder mounted between the booms could counteract single-engine thrust asymmetry far more effectively than conventional single-tail designs. The central nacelle fuselage could be designed as a weapons platform rather than as a structure for housing an engine. The configuration allowed exceptional firepower to be mounted where the pilot could observe and aim it directly. When the Luftwaffe recovered Carson's P-38J Lightning, German intelligence recognized immediately what they possessed. A pristine example of America's most advanced fighter aircraft, not a battle-damaged wreck salvaged from a crash site, not a partially destroyed machine requiring reconstruction, a complete, fully operational aircraft delivered as if by diplomatic courier. German salvage teams examined every component with meticulous care. Unlike many captured aircraft that required extensive repair, Carson's Lightning demanded only routine maintenance before beginning systematic evaluation. Within 48 hours, ground crews had refueled the aircraft with captured American fuel, performed pre-flight checks, and prepared the machine for flight test. A Luftwaffe test pilot selected for his experience and skill climbed into the central nacelle cockpit, started the twin Allison engines, and prepared for the first German evaluation flight. The immediate impressions upon entering the cockpit stunned the German test pilot. The visibility from the bubble canopy exceeded anything he had experienced in any German fighter. The cockpit layout, while unfamiliar, demonstrated logical arrangement with primary instruments easily visible and secondary controls positioned logically. The twin throttles felt different from the single-engine fighters German pilots trained on. The yoke control seemed oversized by German standards, more suited to large transport aircraft than to a fighter. But once airborne, the pilot immediately understood the design rationale. The P-38's handling characteristics at moderate speeds and lower altitudes impressed the German test pilot. The aircraft responded predictably to control inputs. Aileron forces were moderate and well harmonized. Elevator control was positive without being oversensitive. The twin vertical stabilizers mounted at the boom ends provided exceptional directional stability. The aircraft tracked straight and level with minimal trim adjustment. Takeoff and initial climb revealed unexpected performance. The German test pilot advanced the throttles smoothly. The twin Allisons developed their 2,000 horsepower, each with smooth, progressive acceleration. The Lightning accelerated eagerly down the airfield. At approximately 105 miles per hour, the pilot rotated back on the control column, and the distinctive fighter lifted away with surprising lightness for an aircraft weighing over 13,000 pounds. The climb performance impressed the test pilot immediately. The two Allison engines, each equipped with turbo superchargers, drove the aircraft upward with a sustained climb rate that exceeded what German test data predicted. At 5,000 feet, the P-38J climbed at approximately 2,800 feet per minute. At 10,000 feet, the climb rate remained at approximately 2,300 feet per minute. At 15,000 feet, performance degraded to approximately 1,900 feet per minute. These numbers, while demonstrating clear superiority in rate of climb over German fighters equipped with single-stage superchargers, suggested the climb performance would deteriorate substantially at extreme altitude, where the turbo superchargers' advantages would diminish. What occurred instead stunned German observers monitoring the test flight. At 20,000 feet, the P-38J continued climbing at approximately 1,700 feet per minute. At 25,000 feet, still approximately 1,400 feet per minute. At 30,000 feet, the Lightning maintained approximately 1,050 feet per minute climb rate. This performance, particularly above 20,000 feet, exceeded what existing German fighters could achieve by dramatic margins. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G6, the most numerous German fighter, struggled to maintain anything approaching these numbers above 20,000 feet. The German test pilot pushed the P-38J higher, pursuing the aircraft's absolute ceiling through increasingly rarefied air. At 35,000 feet, the climb rate had reduced to approximately 450 feet per minute, but the aircraft remained responsive and controllable. At 37,000 feet, climb performance degraded to barely 100 feet per minute, but the aircraft could still climb. At approximately 38,000 feet, a phenomenon occurred that fascinated the German pilot. The aircraft stopped climbing, but it remained fully controllable. The wings still generated lift sufficient to maintain level flight, the engines continued producing power, and the aircraft handled predictably. The pilot reduced power and maintained altitude for several minutes, at 38,000 feet, then advanced the throttles again, and managed to climb another 500 feet before power and lift balanced at approximately 38,500 feet. This represented an absolute ceiling that exceeded existing German fighters by dramatic margins. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 could reach approximately 38,000 feet with tremendous difficulty and virtually no combat capability at such altitude. The FW 190, another primary German fighter, struggled to reach 36,000 feet. The P-38J operated with full combat capability at altitudes where German fighters barely functioned as fighting machines. The implications proved deeply troubling to German observers. American heavy bombers operated at 25,000 to 28,000 feet, where P-38 escorts could maintain full combat performance, while German interceptors struggled. The escort fighters could position themselves above German fighters by 5,000 to 8,000 feet, providing decisive tactical advantage before combat even began. Level flight testing at various altitudes provided additional sobering data. At 15,000 feet, the P-38J achieved approximately 370 mph, respectable but not exceptional. At 20,000 feet, the speed increased to approximately 410 mph. At 25,000 feet, the Lightning achieved approximately 425 per hour. These speeds matched or slightly exceeded German fighter performance at comparable altitudes, but when testing proceeded to 30,000 feet, the performance differential became decisive. The P-38J achieved approximately 430 mph at 30,000 feet, while contemporary German fighters struggled to exceed 380 mph at similar altitude. This 40 to 50 mph speed differential at extreme altitude proved tactically decisive. German interceptors could not catch P-38 escorts operating at high altitude. German fighters pursuing P-38 seconds, either at altitude or attempting to climb to intercept escort formations, found themselves unable to match the American fighters' performance in the critical altitude band, where bomber escort combat typically occurred. The German test pilot evaluated climb performance in detail. Starting from 15,000 feet, the P-38J and a Messerschmitt Bf 109G6, participating in mock evaluation, climbed simultaneously. At 20,000 feet, the P-38J had established a clear altitude advantage and continued climbing while the Bf 109 continued ascending. At 25,000 feet, the separation measured approximately 1,500 feet with the P-38J still climbing. At 30,000 feet, the Bf 109 had reached its practical climb limit, while the P-38J continued ascending steadily. The test demonstrated that German fighters attempting to climb to intercept P-38 escorts would inevitably lose altitude advantage to escorts that could climb faster to superior altitude, where they would then maintain altitude advantage. Dive performance testing revealed another area where the P-38J demonstrated superiority. The aircraft entered a steep dive from 25,000 feet. The pilot advanced the throttles to maximum power, deploying dive brakes mounted on the wing's upper surfaces to manage acceleration and control dive angle precisely. The P-38J accelerated smoothly through increasing airspeeds. At 20,000 feet, airspeed registered 450 ms per hour. At 15,000 feet, approximately 520 ms per hour. The German test pilot noted that at high speed, the control forces increased substantially, requiring firm pressure on the control yoke to manage the dive. The P-38's large control surfaces and sophisticated design managed the high-speed aerodynamic loads without exhibiting the flutter or control reversal problems that plagued some aircraft at extreme speeds. The pilot initiated recovery, pulling back firmly on the control yoke. The P-38J transitioned smoothly from dive to level flight without structural failure, flutter, or control difficulties. German observers noted that pursuit of a diving P-38 would be extremely difficult. German fighters simply could not match the Lockheed's diving speed and maintaining control during recovery. Maneuverability testing produced expected results with important caveats. At low to moderate speeds and altitudes, the P-38J could not match the turn performance of lighter German fighters. The Bf-109, with its leading-edge slats and relatively light wing loading, could outturn the Lightning in sustained turning combat. This was expected. The P-38J weighed significantly more than German fighters, and this weight disadvantage manifested clearly in slow-speed turning performance. However, German test pilots noted several important factors that modified this performance advantage. At speeds above 270 mph, the P-38J's superior roll rate allowed it to reverse direction faster than German fighters could sustain turns. The American fighter could execute rapid aileron rolls, changing flight direction through inverted flight and rollout, covering greater distance but changing heading faster than conventional turning. This different fighting technique reflected the P-38's design philosophy. Rather than optimizing for tight turns like German fighters, the P-38 emphasized energy retention, rapid reversals at higher speeds, and utilization of altitude and speed advantages to dictate combat geometry. German pilots trained to fight in slow-speed turning combat discovered that P-38 pilots, if properly trained and tactically proficient, would refuse such engagements. P-38 pilots would extend away using superior speed at high altitude, maintain altitude advantage, and attack from advantageous energy states. German fighters pursuing P-38 seconds attempting to force turning combat would find themselves at severe disadvantage, unable to catch retreating P-38 seconds and forced to fight at P-38 pilots' chosen altitude and speed, where American advantages were decisive. The most profound discovery German test pilots made involved the P-38's sophisticated systems integration. The turbo supercharger system, mounted in the tail boom of each engine, incorporated intercoolers that cooled compressed air before entering the engine's supercharger, maintaining superior efficiency at altitude. The system operated automatically through complex mechanical linkages and hydraulic actuators, requiring minimal pilot adjustment. This represented engineering sophistication that German industry had never successfully implemented in production fighters. German experiments with turbo supercharging had encountered persistent problems with complexity, reliability, and maintenance difficulty. The P-38 demonstrated that American industry had solved these challenges successfully. The automatic flight control systems, particularly the autopilot and flight control interconnections, impressed German engineers. The P-38 incorporated electrical systems far more extensively than German fighters. Landing gear retraction was electrical. Trim systems were electrically adjustable. Fuel system management involved electric pumps and crossfeed valves. This electrical sophistication contrasted with German fighters that relied heavily on hydraulics and mechanical linkages. German engineers noted that this electrical approach required enormous quantities of copper wiring and complex electrical components, materials that Germany was increasingly unable to obtain. The 20mm Hispano cannon, mounted in the P-38's nose and fed by ammunition belts running through the fuselage, represented another area of American sophistication. The cannon functioned reliably and could sustain sustained fire without jamming or malfunction. German cannons frequently suffered reliability problems. The 450 caliber machine guns, synchronized to fire through the propeller arcs without hitting the advancing propeller blades, represented American mass production capability at its finest. Every weapon mounted in the nose meant the pilot could observe the point of aim directly, essential for accurate gunnery in combat. German fighters typically mounted armament distributed across wings and fuselage, making accurate aiming difficult. The P-38's centralized armament installation reflected careful tactical thinking about combat requirements. German technical teams disassembled components of the captured Lightning to study manufacturing techniques. The Allison V1200 engines received meticulous examination. German engineers noted the precision manufacturing, tight tolerances, and quality materials throughout. The engines incorporated hydraulic valve tappets rather than mechanical tappets, reducing wear and maintenance requirements. The propeller control mechanisms allowed pilots to adjust blade pitch for optimized performance at various flight conditions, enabling the engines to operate efficiently throughout the entire altitude range. This sophistication contrasted with German engines where propeller control was often manual or limited in capability. The landing gear assembly, though unconventional in its twin-boom configuration, demonstrated excellent engineering. The main gear members retracted outward into the engine booms, reducing parasitic drag when extended. The retraction mechanism operated smoothly and reliably. German observers noted that the P-38's landing gear arrangement eliminated the complex nose gear linkages that German single-boom fighters required. The structural analysis of the P-38J revealed American design philosophy, emphasized redundancy, safety factors, and structural integrity over minimum weight. The wing structure incorporated robust spars and excellent load distribution. The fuselages, both the central nacelle and the engine booms, were overbuilt by German standards, creating structures that could absorb substantial battle damage and remain controllable. German test pilots noted that damage assessments indicated a P-38 could sustain wing damage that would destroy a Bf-109 and still return to base. The cooling system, managing heat from twin engines in a relatively compact airframe, demonstrated sophisticated heat exchanger design and routing. The radiators, mounted in the engine booms below the engines, functioned as an integral part of the airframe structure. This integration of systems throughout the airframe reflected careful planning and sophisticated design that transcended simple performance optimization. One discovery that particularly impressed German observers involved the P-38's exceptional glide performance. With both engines shut down, the P-38J could maintain level flight or shallow descent from considerable altitude, gliding long distances. A pilot experiencing engine failure from enemy fire or mechanical problems could typically glide to friendly territory or seek a suitable landing area. This represented exceptional design achievement, improving pilot survival probability dramatically compared to fighters that required engine power to maintain level flight. The cockpit workspace demonstrated American emphasis on pilot comfort and operational efficiency. The seat was spacious and adjustable in multiple directions. The canopy provided unobstructed forward, side, and rear visibility. Instrument panels displayed information logically organized by function. Controls were positioned within easy reach. The design reflected careful attention to reducing pilot workload, allowing concentration on tactical situations, rather than struggling with aircraft systems management. German test pilots noted this thoughtful cockpit design contrasted sharply with their own fighter designs, where cockpit space was minimized, visibility was restricted by heavy framing, and instrument placement often seemed illogical. The American emphasis on operational ease and pilot comfort reflected different design priorities, where creating aircraft that were relatively easy to fly and maintain superseded the pursuit of maximum performance. After 6 weeks of intensive evaluation at Rechlin, the test center produced a comprehensive technical report classified for distribution only to senior Luftwaffe commanders. The assessment proved remarkably candid. The P-38 Lightning represented a fundamentally different design philosophy than German fighters, where German designs pursued maximum performance through efficiency and minimum weight. The P-38 emphasized capability across a broad envelope, structural strength, and operational practicality. The P-38's principal advantages resided in high-altitude performance, climb rate above 20,000 feet, diving speed, and altitude ceiling. The aircraft could operate at altitudes where German fighters barely functioned as fighting machines. The armament concentration, centralized in the nose for direct pilot observation, proved superior to distributed wing armament. The structural strength and durability enabled P-38 pilots to absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter fighters. The primary P-38 limitation involved slow-speed turning performance, where the aircraft could not match light German fighters. However, this limitation could be overcome through superior energy management, maintaining speed and altitude advantage, and refusing slow-speed turning combat. German pilots properly trained on P-38 tactics and recognizing the American fighters' advantages would stand a significantly better chance of survival. The report concluded that existing German fighters required substantial improvements to remain competitive with P-38 formations, particularly at high altitudes. The natural response to high-altitude American fighter superiority would be accelerated development of German fighters capable of matching P-38 performance. Development programs for improved Bf-109 variants, incorporating refined engines and aerodynamic improvements, were already underway. The FW-190D variant, featuring an inline engine rather than the radial engine of earlier FW-190 models, promised substantial altitude improvements. However, these programs required years to complete and testing to confirm capability. Germany did not possess years. The strategic air offensive against Germany intensified throughout 1944. Heavy bomber formations, escorted by P-38 Lightnings and other fighter types, struck German industrial targets with increasing frequency and accuracy. The P-38's exceptional range, particularly with external drop tanks, enabled escort fighters to accompany bombers throughout entire missions deep into Germany and back to bases in England. The combination of bomber altitude, escort superiority at altitude, and continuous escort coverage throughout missions meant German fighter interception forces faced overwhelming disadvantage. The captured P-38J Lightning became the centerpiece of a comprehensive Luftwaffe pilot training program. After completing evaluation testing, the aircraft was transferred to the Wanda Zirkus Rosarius, the specialized unit commanded by Major Theodor Rosarius that had been established in 1943 to conduct tactical and familiarization training using captured Allied aircraft. The Wanda Zirkus maintained an inventory of captured Allied fighters including P-38 Lightnings, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, and Supermarine Spitfires. The unit operated as a traveling demonstration and training facility, visiting Luftwaffe fighter bases across Germany and occupied territories to educate frontline pilots about Allied aircraft capabilities. The program represented a systematic attempt to counter Allied advantages through tactical innovation and pilot training informed by direct experience with enemy aircraft. The P-38J, captured from Lieutenant Carson, was repainted in standard Luftwaffe camouflage and bore the identification code T9+LC, part of the Wanda Zirkus's standardized marking system for captured aircraft used in training and demonstrations. The distinctive twin booms and central nacelle made the P-38 unmistakable even from a distance. When the Wanda Zirkus arrived at fighter bases throughout 1944 and 1945, the appearance of a P-38 Lightning bearing German markings created surreal and memorable impressions. Pilots assembled to observe a captured American fighter that embodied capabilities they faced regularly in combat. Ground personnel examined an aircraft representing advanced American industrial production. Younger pilots received education that might improve their survival chances. Flight demonstrations began with the captured P-38J taxiing past assembled Luftwaffe personnel. The aircraft's distinctive configuration created unforgettable visual impressions. Then came takeoff and initial climb demonstrations. A Luftwaffe test pilot would advance the twin throttles and accelerate the P-38J down the runway. The acceleration was smooth and powerful. The distinctive aircraft lifted away and climbed steadily while assembled German pilots watched. Climb to altitude demonstrations proved particularly impressive to Luftwaffe observers. The P-38J would climb from the airfield to 10,000 feet, then 15,000 feet, then 20,000 feet, the climb rate remaining strong where German fighters would have been struggling. At 25,000 feet, The P-38J would continue climbing while Messerschmitt Bf-109s or Focke-Wulf Fw-190s orbited below, their climb performance completely inadequate to reach the altitude where the American fighter operated comfortably. The demonstration made undeniable the altitude performance gap. German pilots could not catch P-38 escorts operating at high altitude. They could not climb fast enough to establish altitude advantage. They could not maintain combat capability at extreme altitudes, where bomber escort combat typically occurred. The speed demonstrations revealed P-38 capabilities at altitude. A test pilot would accelerate the Lightning to maximum speed at 30,000 feet, achieving velocities that German fighters couldn't match. Turning demonstrations showed both P-38 strengths and limitations. At low altitude and moderate speed, a Bf-109 would demonstrate superior turning performance, suggesting German pilots retained advantages in that flight regime. Then came the high-speed turning demonstration. At speed above 300 miles per hour, the P-38J would reverse direction through rapid aileron rolls, changing heading faster than the German fighter could sustain conventional turns. The demonstration showed graphically how combat tactics could overcome turning performance disadvantages. If German pilots forced slow-speed turning combat, they might achieve advantage, but competent P-38 pilots would refuse such engagements, maintaining speed and altitude advantage, dictating combat geometry, and fighting at conditions where American advantages proved decisive. Mock combat sessions between P-38 seconds and German fighters provided invaluable tactical training. Selected Luftwaffe pilots would engage captured Lightnings in carefully supervised mock combat under observation by other pilots and instructors. These engagements, conducted at lower altitudes, where structural limits permitted aggressive maneuvering without risk of exceeding aircraft design limits, demonstrated specific tactics. German pilots attempted to force slow-speed turning combat, where their fighters' maneuverability advantages could be exploited. P-38 pilots would refuse such combat, extending away using superior speed to create separation, then reversing to attack from energy advantage. The tactical lessons proved clear. Fighting a competent P-38 pilot required specific approaches. Avoid high-altitude combat, avoid direct engagement where P-38 advantages proved decisive, seek engagement at lower altitudes where German maneuverability advantages could be exploited, accumulate numerical advantage before attacking, utilize surprise and positioning advantage. These lessons circulated through Luftwaffe units as pilots completed training with the Wonder Zirkus and returned to operational squadrons to share knowledge with fellow pilots. While tactical training improved German pilot preparedness and potentially improved survival probability, it could not overcome the fundamental performance advantages the P-38 Lightning possessed at the altitudes where strategic air war combat typically occurred. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German pilots who flew captured P-38 seconds or participated in mock combat training acquired a realistic understanding of tactical advantages and disadvantages. Combat statistics from 1944 and 1945 demonstrated the P-38's effectiveness. Between January 1944 and August 1945, P-38 Lightnings achieved confirmed aerial victories exceeding 1,400 German aircraft, with numerous additional destroyed on the ground through strafing attacks. P-38 losses to German fighters numbered substantially lower, reflecting the aircraft's performance advantages at altitude, pilot training advantages as American pilot quality improved while German pilot quality declined, and German reluctance to engage P-38 formations in decisive combat. The strategic bombing campaign over Germany succeeded substantially because P-38 escorts, combined with P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, achieved air superiority over German territory. This air superiority enabled bomber formations to strike targets with minimal fighter escort losses and maximum target accuracy. Without this fighter escort capability, the strategic air offensive would have been catastrophically expensive, perhaps operationally infeasible. The P-38's exceptional range meant escorts could accompany bombers from England throughout missions deep into Germany and return safely. German fighters could never achieve the window of opportunity to attack unescorted bombers that had characterized earlier bombing campaigns. Every bombing mission featured fighter escort throughout. German interceptor forces faced overwhelming tactical disadvantage, having to fight through escort formations to reach bombers, suffering losses they could not sustain, and ultimately proving incapable of protecting German cities and industry from aerial bombardment. Production statistics revealed the magnitude of American advantage. By 1944, American P-38 production reached 1,000-plus aircraft monthly from multiple factories. Germany produced all fighter types, combined numbering approximately 3,000 monthly. German industry simply could not replace losses at rates American production replaced them. Even if German pilots achieved favorable kill ratios, and they did not, German forces could not win an attrition war against American production capacity. The captured P-38J Lightning, serial number 42-68347, served the Wanda Zirkus Rosarius for approximately 18 months after being transferred to the unit in mid-1944. The aircraft traveled extensively across Germany and occupied territories, visiting multiple airfields where it conducted demonstrations and training flights. The exact circumstances of the aircraft's loss remain uncertain from available documentation. Some sources suggest the aircraft was destroyed in a bombing raid against an airfield where it was stationed. Other accounts indicate it was deliberately destroyed by retreating German forces to prevent recapture by advancing Allied armies. Possibilities include mechanical failure resulting in a fatal crash. The ultimate fate of the aircraft matters less than the operational history and the knowledge that German pilots and engineers derived from examining, testing, and flying the captured Lightning. The P-38 represented American design philosophy at its most distinctive. Rather than attempting to compete with German fighters at their preferred engagement parameters, American designers created an aircraft that excelled at the specific requirements of the strategic air war then consuming Europe. High-altitude performance, long range, considerable firepower, structural durability, and operational reliability superseded the pursuit of maximum turn performance or minimum weight. This design philosophy would influence aircraft development far beyond World War II. The lessons American engineers learned from the success of the P-38, P-47, and P-51 shaped fighter development for years afterward. German designers who examined captured P-38 seconds and survived the war carried forward understanding that durability and operational practicality equaled or exceeded the pursuit of peak performance. Post-war German aircraft development incorporated lessons from wartime experience testing American fighters. The emphasis shifted from absolute performance optimization toward capability across a broader envelope, structural strength, and manufacturing feasibility. Theodore Rosarius, commander of the Wanda Zirkus Rosarius, survived the war and lived until 1967. His organization had trained thousands of Luftwaffe pilots in enemy aircraft capabilities, potentially improving survival rates and tactical effectiveness through realistic training. The estimates suggest pilots exposed to captured aircraft demonstrations showed approximately 10 to 20% improvement in combat effectiveness. When encountering these aircraft operationally, a modest improvement reflecting better understanding of enemy capabilities and optimal tactics. However, these improvements at the individual level could not overcome systematic disadvantages German fighter forces faced. The strategic situation, numerical inferiority, fuel shortages, pilot training deficiencies, and the inherent performance advantages P-38 escorts possessed at bomber escort altitudes remained decisive factors beyond tactical remediation. Second Lieutenant Ralph Carson, Jr., who delivered his P-38J Lightning into German hands through navigation error, survived the war as a prisoner of war. Like many veterans, Carson rarely spoke in detail about his wartime experiences after liberation. The circumstances of his capture on what had started as a routine escort mission likely represented a source of personal disappointment, possibly shame that he preferred not to revisit. Carson lived quietly after the war, working in civilian aviation for several decades. He died in 1992 without leaving extensive public accounts of his experiences. However, his forced landing inadvertently benefited historical understanding. By delivering a pristine P-38J to German evaluators, Carson provided German technical intelligence with a comprehensive understanding of cutting-edge American fighter design. The knowledge Germans gained was accurate and thorough. German test pilots documented P-38 capabilities honestly, acknowledged American engineering excellence explicitly, and identified tactical approaches for engaging P-38 seconds under favorable circumstances. But accurate intelligence about superior enemy capabilities provided limited practical benefit when German forces lacked the resources to develop competitive aircraft or the industrial capacity to produce sufficient quantities. The P-38 Lightning testing program demonstrated technical excellence in German military engineering. Luftwaffe test pilots approached evaluation with professional integrity, producing accurate technical assessments. German engineers systematically analyzed American design approaches and manufacturing techniques. German pilots received realistic training about combat tactics for engaging P-38 formations. Professional competence in evaluation and training could not overcome overwhelming strategic disadvantages. Germany faced an enemy producing military aircraft in quantities exceeding German total production while fighting on multiple fronts. Germany faced an enemy commanding vast industrial resources, access to strategic materials, and manufacturing sophistication that German industry could not match. Germany faced an enemy whose pilots trained for substantially longer periods, accumulated greater experience, and fought with ever-improving operational procedures and tactics. The captured P-38J Lightning served as a physical manifestation of these abstract strategic realities. Every system examined demonstrated engineering sophistication and manufacturing capability that Germany recognized it could not match. The aircraft embodied decisions about design philosophy that American conditions allowed but German circumstances did not permit. American designers could afford to build fighters weighing 15,000 pounds fully loaded, using sophisticated systems requiring vast quantities of materials, incorporating design margins that seemed extravagant compared to German practice. American industry could afford to manufacture these complex machines in enormous numbers while maintaining quality and delivering them to operational units within weeks of completion. German industry, increasingly constrained by strategic bombing, material shortages, and the necessity of dispersed manufacturing to avoid concentrated bombing, struggled to maintain production of simpler designs. The captured P-38 forced acknowledgement that Germany faced not merely a quantitative disadvantage but qualitative superiority in aircraft, training, and industrial capacity that no tactical innovation could overcome. The story of Luftwaffe test pilots confronting the P-38 Lightning parallels the broader German military experience during the latter stages of World War II across all theatres and services. Initial confidence in German technological superiority gave way to recognition that Allied forces possessed decisive advantages in multiple critical dimensions. Advanced aircraft design represented one manifestation of this broader advantage. American airframe design excellence, engine development, avionics sophistication, manufacturing capability, and pilot training combined to create air forces that German fighters encountered with decreasing success as the war progressed. The Luftwaffe conducted its evaluation of the P-38 with professionalism and technical competence. German pilots and engineers learned precisely what the American fighter could accomplish. This knowledge translated into tactical improvements that modestly improved German pilot survival probability and combat effectiveness. But knowledge alone could not reverse the strategic momentum that had begun turning decisively against Germany by the time Carson delivered his P-38J to Luftwaffe evaluators. The lessons embedded in the P-38 Lightning extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to encompass broader questions about industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and the nature of modern warfare. The aircraft was manufactured by one of dozens of American aircraft manufacturers, producing fighters on a scale that surpassed all German fighter production combined. The engines were built by Allison, one of multiple American aero engine manufacturers. The systems and components were sourced from specialized suppliers whose products reflected American manufacturing, standardization, and quality control. The aircraft was one of many advanced types being produced simultaneously. American forces fielded the P-38, the P-47, the P-51, the B-17, the B-29, and numerous other aircraft types, each representing significant engineering achievement. Germany, by contrast, was struggling to keep its fighter force equipped with adequate quantities of aircraft as losses mounted. Production limitations, material shortages, and the destructive effect of strategic bombing created a situation where replacing combat losses became increasingly difficult, regardless of German manufacturing efforts. The captured P-38J Lightning served its final operational purpose as an instrument of revelation. It demonstrated through its very existence American technological capabilities, industrial production methods, and design philosophy that Germany could study, appreciate, and learn from without being able to replicate or effectively counter given circumstances of 1944. The aircraft carried direct physical testimony that Germany faced enemies whose capabilities exceeded German achievement across multiple critical dimensions. That testimony, delivered through systematic technical evaluation and pilot training, provided valuable knowledge to those who received it. But knowledge of superior enemy capabilities, while potentially improving tactical effectiveness, the German submariners first became aware that something fundamental had changed in Allied anti-submarine tactics during the spring of 1943. The change manifested not as a sudden revelation, but as an accumulation of disturbing reports from boats returning to Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire. Commanders described attacks that violated every tactical principle they had learned, escorts maintaining sonar contact throughout the engagement, weapons that struck without warning, explosions that occurred only on direct contact rather than at preset depths. Korvettenkapitän Herbert Werner, who survived 5 different U-boat commands, including the sinking of U-612 inches August of 1942 and U-415 inches July of 1944, would later describe the transformation in his memoir, Iron Coffins. "The change came gradually," he wrote. "Individual reports seemed like aberrations, tactical mistakes by the boat commander, or unusual luck by the escorts. But by summer of 1943, the pattern was undeniable. Allied escorts possessed a new weapon that fundamentally altered the tactical equation. When depth charges attacked, you heard them coming. The propellers passing overhead gave minutes of warning. You could execute evasive maneuvers, go deep, change course, anything to be elsewhere when the charges detonated. Even when they exploded close enough to damage the boat, you knew what was happening. The concussion, the violent shaking, the cascade of breaking glass and sparking electrical equipment, all confirmed the attack was continuing but provided hope you might survive. The new weapon was different. The sound was distinctive, a rapid series of small splashes, like hail striking the surface, then silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. You waited in the darkness, holding your breath, knowing that 24 projectiles were plummeting toward you at 7 meters per second, and that if even one struck the hull, the boat was doomed. There was no warning of impact, no time to brace, just the sudden, catastrophic explosion that punched through the pressure hull and flooded the compartment in seconds. German naval intelligence identified the weapon through prisoner interrogations and examination of unexploded projectiles recovered from failed attacks. The Kriegsmarine designated it Eagle, Hedgehog in German, maintaining the British nickname. Technical reports circulated through U-boat headquarters in Paris and Berlin, analyzing the tactical implications. The reports confirmed what returning commanders already understood. The weapon fundamentally changed submarine warfare mathematics. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had assumed command of the entire Kriegsmarine in January of 1943 while retaining direct oversight of U-boat operations, reviewed these intelligence reports with growing concern. His headquarters maintained detailed plots of every engagement, every convoy battle, every U-boat loss. The statistics painted an increasingly grim picture. Loss rates that had been sustainable, though painful, through the autumn of 1942 were accelerating beyond replacement capacity. The spring of 1943 marked the crisis. In May alone, 41 to 43 U-boats were lost, depending on classification methodology. Black May, as it became known among submariners, represented catastrophic casualties that no military force could sustain indefinitely. Approximately 25% of the operational U-boat force was destroyed in a single month. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the agonizing decision to temporarily withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic, conceding tactical defeat in the ocean that had been Germany's primary strategic weapon. The Hedgehog contributed significantly to this disaster. While the weapon accounted for only a portion of total losses, Allied aircraft, radar-equipped escorts, improved sonar, and superior cryptanalysis all played crucial roles. The psychological impact on U-boat crews exceeded its direct lethality. The weapon represented Allied technological superiority manifest in its most brutal form. German submariners faced enemies who possessed capabilities they could not match and could not counter. Kapitänleutnant Peter Erich Kremer, who commanded U-333 through multiple successful patrols and survived the war as one of only 3 senior U-boat commanders to do so, later reflected on the tactical helplessness created by forward-throwing weapons. His memoirs, published in 1984 as U-Boat Commander by the Naval Institute Press, described the fundamental shift in submarine warfare after 1943. Traditional depth-charge attacks, Kremer wrote, could be evaded through skillful maneuvering and understanding of escort tactics. The attacking destroyer lost sonar contact as it passed overhead, creating a window for evasion. The charges sank slowly, providing time to change depth and course. Even when caught by a pattern, the cushion of water between explosion and hull often meant survival, though perhaps with damage requiring return to port. But forward-throwing weapons eliminated these tactical advantages. The escort maintained contact throughout. The projectiles reached depth in seconds rather than minutes. Contact detonation meant no near-miss survival, only catastrophic hull breach or complete evasion. A U-boat commander facing this weapon possessed no effective countermeasure. Survival became a function of probability rather than skill. Were you inside the 30-meter circle or outside it? The weapon removed seamanship from the equation, reducing submarine combat to mathematical chance. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The physical and psychological effects of a Hedgehog attack, when it struck home, were unlike anything depth charges produced. The testimony of survivors, rare as successful Hedgehog attacks typically left no survivors, and technical analysis of recovered hulls painted a horrifying picture of the weapon's lethality. When a Hedgehog projectile struck a U-boat's pressure hull, typically at an angle determined by the submarine's depth and orientation, the contact fuse detonated 35 pounds of Torpex explosive against the steel. The blast, focused inward by the external water pressure, punched a roughly circular hole 3 to 4 inches in diameter through hull plating, designed to withstand ambient pressure but not concentrated explosive force at direct contact. At typical attack depths of 200 to 300 meters, ambient water pressure ranged from 300 to 450 pounds per square inch. Water flooded through the breach at approximately 400 gallons per minute, though this rate increased as internal pressure equalized and the flooding continued. This volume of water, under tremendous pressure, instantly transformed the affected compartment into a death trap. The incoming water created multiple lethal effects simultaneously. First, it raised atmospheric pressure inside the submarine, proportional to the flooding volume and the compartment's enclosed space. As pressure increased, temperature climbed rapidly. Within 30 seconds, compartment temperature could exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 minutes, temperatures approached or exceeded 200 degrees. Crew members caught in the flooding compartment faced an impossible situation. The superheated, pressurized air seared lungs with each breath. The incoming water, frigid at depth, rapidly filled the compartment from the lowest point upward. Equipment failed as electrical systems short-circuited. Emergency lighting died. plunging the compartment into absolute darkness, broken only by occasional electrical sparks. The noise was overwhelming, the roar of water under tremendous pressure, forcing its way through a small opening. Crew members attempting to seal the compartment found the task physically impossible. Hatches designed to withstand pressure from outside could not be secured against internal flooding. Even if the hatch could be physically closed, the rubber gaskets designed for external pressure failed when reversed. Wooden plugs, rubber patches, quick-setting cement, all the damage control equipment German submarines carried, proved useless against a 3-inch hole, admitting water at 400 pounds per square inch. Meanwhile, the flooding destroyed the submarine's carefully calculated buoyancy. German submarines operated on precise weight-to-buoyancy ratios, maintained through careful control of ballast tanks, fuel consumption, and cargo distribution. A few thousand pounds of water flooding into a compartment instantly destroyed this balance. The submarine, unable to compensate through ballast adjustments fast enough, began settling deeper into the ocean. As the boat descended, external pressure increased, accelerating the flooding rate and raising internal temperature further. The descent became self-reinforcing. More depth meant more pressure meant faster, flooding meant greater weight meant faster descent. The submarine entered a death spiral from which recovery was impossible. The crew had perhaps 3 to 5 minutes from initial breach to catastrophic failure. Some boats imploded when the pressure hull exceeded its design limits, the steel collapsing inward with a sound described by sonar operators as resembling a massive underwater crunch. Other boats continued settling until they reached crush depth, the point at which ambient pressure exceeded what any compartment could withstand. The implosion, when it came, was instantaneous and total, killing everyone aboard in a fraction of a second. Survivors from U-boats that managed to surface after Hedgehog damage, a rare occurrence typically involving hits on external tanks rather than the pressure hull, described the psychological terror of the attack. Oberleutnant zur See Heinrich Bleichroth, commanding U-109 when it was damaged by Hedgehog in May of 1943, but managed to surface and scuttle before sinking, gave testimony during interrogation at Fort Hunt, Virginia. The splashes came without warning, Bleichroth told his interrogators. Our hydrophone operator reported multiple small contacts entering the water ahead of our position, then silence. We understood what it meant. Every man in the boat held his breath, waiting. The silence stretched for what seemed like minutes, but was perhaps 20 seconds. Then, nothing. The projectiles had missed, landing around us but not striking the hull. We attempted to change depth and course, but the escort maintained perfect contact. 3 minutes later, another salvo. Again the terrible waiting, and again we were spared. The third attack struck the external fuel tank, rupturing it but not penetrating the pressure hull. The explosion was deafening even through the water and steel. The boat shook violently. All electrical power failed. Emergency lighting revealed a scene of chaos. Broken glass covered the deck. Equipment had torn loose from mountings. Several crew members had been thrown against bulkheads, suffering injuries. But we were alive. The pressure hull had held. We surfaced immediately, knowing another attack would find us. The escort was less than 500 meters away, closing rapidly. We abandoned the ship, scuttling the boat before British sailors could board her. Of our crew of 48, 45 survived to be captured. We were lucky. Most boats hit by this weapon simply vanished. One moment they were on sonar. The next, nothing. Just an oil slick and debris field marking where 50 men had died in seconds. The tactical evolution of Hedgehog employment through 1943 and 44 demonstrated Allied learning and German helplessness. Early in the weapons deployment, inexperienced escort crews often failed to capitalize on its advantages. They fired single salvos, waited for results, then either celebrated success or moved on to other targets. Kill rates, while better than depth charges, remained disappointingly low, but as combat information centers became standard on escort vessels, and as crew training improved, tactical employment evolved dramatically. Methodical commanders learned to treat Hedgehog attacks as iterative processes. First, salvo provided targeting data. If it missed, the sonar operator maintained contact and calculated evasion. Second salvo adjusted for this evasion. If that missed, the process repeated. 3, 4, even 5 salvos in rapid succession, each refining the attack, each closing the probability window until success became inevitable. This methodical approach proved devastatingly effective. German submarine commanders, recognizing the pattern, attempted radical evasion maneuvers. Emergency speed changes, hard rudder at maximum rate, diving or surfacing rapidly. But these maneuvers took time to execute, and the submarine was predictable. An escort with experienced sonar operators could anticipate evasion and position successive salvos to intercept. The record for methodical Hedgehog employment was established by USS Eugene E. Elmore, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, during its attack on U-549 on May 29, 1944. The engagement demonstrated everything Hedgehog could accomplish when operated by a trained, determined crew. U-549, a Type IXC, 40 submarine commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Detlev Krankenhagen, had departed Lorient on May 14, 1944 for a patrol in the South Atlantic. The boat was snorkel-equipped, one of the new technologies that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, reducing vulnerability to air attack. But snorkels could not protect against determined surface escorts. On May 29, U-549 encountered Task Group 21.11, consisting of the escort carrier USS Block Island and Escort Division 60, which included USS Ahrens, USS Barr, USS Eugene E. Elmore, and USS Payne. In a rare moment of tactical success, Krankenhagen maneuvered into an attack position and fired a spread of acoustic torpedoes. 2 struck Block Island, causing catastrophic damage that would sink the carrier, the only American carrier lost in the Atlantic during World War II. But the torpedo attack revealed U-549's position to the escorting destroyer escorts. The 4 escorts immediately converged on the submarine's location, sonar operators tracking the boat as Krankenhagen attempted to evade. Commander Fletcher Conkey, commanding Eugene E. Elmore, positioned his vessel for a Hedgehog attack. The first salvo, launched at approximately 1,530 hours, missed. Sonar maintained perfect contact throughout. Elmore's crew, trained to obsessive precision since the ship's commissioning, reloaded the launcher in 3 minutes. The second attack missed as well, though sonar operators reported the submarine had altered course attempting to evade. Third salvo. Miss. Fourth salvo. Miss. The pattern continued through the afternoon and into evening. U-549's crew, recognizing they faced a methodical opponent who would not relent, executed every evasion technique they knew. Emergency depth changes, radical course alterations, speed variations, attempts to position the submarine directly beneath Elmore, where sonar geometry made tracking difficult. Nothing worked. The American sonar team, among the best in the Atlantic Fleet, maintained contact through every maneuver. At approximately 2,110 hours, nearly 6 hours after the first attack, Elmore launched its 9th Hedgehog salvo. Sonar operators, tracking the submarine at 280 meters depth, had predicted Krankenhagen would attempt another emergency deep dive. The salvo was positioned not where the submarine currently was, but where it would be 30 seconds later if the evasion followed the pattern established through the previous 8 attacks. The prediction was perfect. Sonar operators heard 2 distinct explosions in rapid succession, indicating at least 2 projectiles had struck the pressure hull. The submarine's propeller noise, which had been audible throughout the engagement, ceased abruptly. Sonar contact faded to nothing. A massive oil slick began rising to the surface, followed by debris. Air bubbles erupted from the depths as internal compartments flooded and expelled their atmosphere. U-549 sank to the ocean floor with all 57 crew members dead. Eugene E. Elmore's attack demonstrated the mathematical inevitability that Hedgehog created when operated with methodical precision. 9 attacks over 6 hours, each refining the targeting solution until success became unavoidable. The submarine had possessed no effective countermeasure. Every evasion maneuver simply provided more data for the next attack, The tactical equation had become unwinnable for German submariners, but Eugene E. Elmore's record paled compared to the most extraordinary anti-submarine performance of the entire war, achieved by USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort commissioned in December of 1943. Between May 19 and May 31, 1944, a span of just 12 days, England sank 6 Japanese submarines, all using Hedgehog. The feat remains unmatched in naval history and demonstrated the weapon's devastating effectiveness when combined with superior sonar and determined crew work. England's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, had drilled his crew obsessively since taking command. Hedgehog reload procedures were practiced until the crew could prepare the launcher for a second attack in under 3 minutes. Sonar operators trained continuously, learning to distinguish subtle variations in echo characteristics that indicated submarine depth changes or course alterations. The Combat Information Center team rehearsed coordination between sonar tracking, ship maneuvering, and weapon release until the process became instinctive. This training paid spectacular dividends during England's patrol with Escort Division 39 Inches, the South Pacific. On May 19, 1944, the division, consisting of England, USS George, and USS Raby, received intelligence that Japanese submarine I-16 was operating near the Admiralty Islands. American cryptanalysts had broken Japanese naval codes, providing precise information about submarine patrol areas and movement orders. England located I-16 submerged at approximately 0345 hours on May 19. The Japanese submarine, a large fleet boat designed for long-range operations, attempted standard evasion maneuvers when it detected the approaching destroyer escort. Pendleton positioned England for a Hedgehog attack. The first salvo missed. Sonar maintained contact. The second attack launched 3 minutes later. Multiple explosions confirmed hits. I-16 sank with all 100 crew members. 4 days later, on May 23, England encountered RO-106, a smaller Japanese coastal submarine, 2 Hedgehog salvos. The second struck home. RO-106 sank in under 300 meters of water. May 24 brought RO-104, 1 salvo. Direct hit. May 26, RO-116, 2 salvos. The second was successful. May 30th, RO-108, 3 salvos. The third struck. And finally, on May 31st, I-19, another fleet submarine. This engagement proved the most challenging. I-19's commander, recognizing he faced a methodical opponent, executed radical evasion maneuvers. The engagement lasted several hours. England fired 4 Hedgehog salvos before the fourth struck home, sending I-19 to the bottom with its crew of 94. 6 submarines in 12 days. Over 500 Japanese submariners were killed, all accomplished with a single weapon, the Hedgehog, operated by a crew of 186 officers and enlisted men who had trained to obsessive perfection. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message to England that would become famous in naval circles. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The achievement demonstrated what Hedgehog could accomplish in the hands of a superbly trained crew, backed by excellent intelligence. The Japanese submarine force, already suffering catastrophic losses from American anti-submarine operations, never recovered from this blow. The psychological impact on Japanese submarine commanders paralleled what German U-boat crews experienced in the Atlantic. The knowledge that Allied escorts possessed weapons that could maintain contact throughout the attack and that exploded only on direct contact transformed submarine operations from calculated risk into statistical death sentence. German attempts to counter Hedgehog effectiveness proved largely futile. The Kriegsmarine explored multiple approaches, none successful enough to restore the tactical balance. Increased diving depth was attempted, but Type 7 U-boats, which comprised the bulk of the German submarine force, were limited to approximately 200 to 250 meters operational depth. Deeper diving required structural modifications that could not be implemented across the fleet. Improved evasion tactics were developed and disseminated through training programs and tactical directives, but these provided minimal advantage. A submarine could evade a single Hedgehog attack through radical maneuvering, but successive attacks, each adjusted based on observed evasion patterns, eventually found the target. The mathematics were unforgiving. Acoustic decoys, devices that created false sonar returns to confuse Allied sonar, showed promise in testing but proved ineffective against experienced operators. The Kriegsmarine developed Bold, a chemical decoy that created bubbles mimicking a submarine's sonar signature, but this provided only temporary confusion. Alert sonar operators quickly learned to distinguish between decoys and actual submarines. The most effective German countermeasure proved to be the schnorkel, the breathing tube that allowed submarines to operate diesel engines while submerged. By reducing time spent surfaced, schnorkels decreased vulnerability to radar-equipped aircraft. But schnorkels provided no protection against surface escorts once the submarine was detected. A schnorkeling U-boat remained vulnerable to Hedgehog attack, and the schnorkel itself created a distinctive radar and visual signature that actually aided detection. By 1944, German U-boat operations had shifted from offensive campaigns seeking to sink merchant shipping to defensive survival exercises. Boats spent increasingly more time submerged, conserving battery power, avoiding detection at almost any cost. When detection occurred, survival replaced mission success as the primary goal. Commanders who might once have pressed attacks now prioritized escape. The psychological burden on U-boat crews became unsustainable. These men understood they were fighting a lost battle with obsolete equipment against technologically superior opponents. Every patrol became a survival exercise. Every convoy encounter became a test of luck rather than skill. Every Allied escort potentially carried the weapon that exploded only on contact, providing no warning and no second chance. Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders with 46 ships, sunk totaling 225,712 tons, addressed the psychological crisis in a speech to U-boat officers at the Naval Academy in October of 1943. The text, recovered after the war, provided remarkable insight into German understanding of their predicament. "We face enemies," Luth told his audience, "who possess technological capabilities that exceed our own in nearly every dimension. Their radar can see through darkness and storm. Their sonar tracks us at ranges we cannot match. Their weapons strike without warning, exploding, only on contact. We cannot match these capabilities through courage or skill alone. The physics of modern warfare have turned against us, yet we continue fighting because duty demands it, because every convoy we threaten forces the Allies to divert escort vessels from other theatres, because every merchant ship we sink delays their strategic plans by days or weeks, because surrender is unthinkable, while Germany fights for survival. But we must acknowledge the truth to ourselves, if not publicly. The technological battle has been lost. We fight now to inflict maximum damage before the inevitable end." The statistical summary of Hedgehog effectiveness confirmed Luth's assessment. Between 1943 and war's end in May of 1945, Hedgehog attacks sank approximately 47 German U-boats and 22 Japanese submarines, though exact figures remain debated among historians due to classification uncertainties and overlapping attack credits. What is undisputed is the weapon's kill rate, approximately 20 to 25% by war's end, compared to 1.6% for depth charges. This tenfold improvement in lethality derived entirely from the weapon's tactical advantages, forward-throwing capability that maintained sonar contact fusing that provided immediate feedback and avoided disturbing the acoustic environment, rapid reload capability that allowed iterative attacks, pattern design that matched submarine dimensions. The combination proved devastating. The human cost was catastrophic for the Kriegsmarine. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats during World War II, approximately 30,000 died, representing a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any military service on either side. While Hedgehog accounted for only a portion of these losses, Allied aircraft, depth charges, mines, and other weapons all contributed. The psychological impact exceeded its direct lethality. German submariners understood that when facing a Hedgehog-equipped escort, Survival depended primarily on luck rather than skill. The weapon had removed seamanship from the tactical equation, reducing submarine warfare to probability mathematics. This knowledge, the understanding that no amount of training or courage could ensure survival against an enemy possessing overwhelming technological superiority, broke morale more effectively than any conventional defeat. The technology transfer and international adoption of Hedgehog extended beyond the British and American navies. The Soviet Navy received Hedgehog through Lend-Lease, though Soviet anti-submarine operations focused primarily on the Baltic and Black Seas, where different tactical conditions limited the weapon's effectiveness. The Royal Canadian Navy, which provided a substantial portion of convoy escort forces in the North Atlantic, equipped destroyers and corvettes with Hedgehog throughout 1943 and 44. Canadian escort vessels achieved notable successes with the weapon. HMCS Trentonian sank U-356 with Hedgehog on December 27, 1943, HMCS Street. Catherine's destroyed U-1004 inches, June of 1945. The Canadian experience demonstrated that the weapon's effectiveness depended primarily on crew training and tactical employment rather than advanced electronics or computing power. A well-trained crew with basic sonar could achieve kills that poorly trained crews with advanced equipment could not. The post-war analysis of Hedgehog, conducted by naval research organizations on both sides, revealed fascinating technical details about the weapon's performance that had been classified during the war. The circular pattern of 24 projectiles, which appeared elegantly simple, actually embodied sophisticated probability calculations. The pattern diameter of 30 meters matched precisely with the dimensions of a Type 7 U-boat, approximately 67 meters long and 6 meters wide. Statistical analysis demonstrated that if a submarine occupied the circle, the probability of at least one hit exceeded 90% if the targeting was accurate. If 2 salvos were fired with the submarine still in the general area, probability approached 99%. 3 salvos made success essentially inevitable. The mathematics explained why methodical commanders like those on USS England achieved such remarkable records. The contact fuse mechanism, which had required years of development to perfect, represented a triumph of precision engineering under hostile conditions. The fuse had to survive launch acceleration of approximately 30 grams, violent enough to incapacitate a human being. It had to withstand water entry at 40 to 50 miles per hour, the impact equivalent to hitting a brick wall. It had to remain sensitive enough to detonate on contact with steel plating, while not detonating from impact with water or from the shock of nearby detonations. British and American engineers solved these problems through iterative design and extensive testing. The final fuse employed a mechanical trigger mechanism that armed only after launch and water entry, preventing premature detonation. A striker pin held in place by a delicate spring released only when impact compressed the fuse nose. The mechanism was so sensitive that technicians handling projectiles had to work carefully to avoid accidental triggering. The Torpex explosive filling represented another technological advantage. This British development, combining RDX, TNT, and powdered aluminum, delivered approximately 50% more blast effect than TNT alone. The aluminum powder, when mixed with oxygen released by the RDX detonation, created secondary combustion that significantly enhanced the explosion. Against a submarine pressure hull, this translated to larger breach holes and more severe structural damage. The German technical assessment of captured Hedgehog projectiles, conducted at testing facilities in occupied France, acknowledged Allied engineering superiority. A classified report dated November of 1943 admitted the weapon represents sophisticated application of established principles. While Germany could theoretically produce equivalent systems, the manufacturing precision required, particularly for reliable contact fuses, exceeds our current industrial capacity given strategic bombing priorities and material shortages. This assessment was brutally honest. Germany possessed the theoretical knowledge to create Hedgehog-equivalent weapons. But theoretical knowledge meant nothing without the industrial capacity to manufacture thousands of projectiles to exacting tolerances, the steel alloys to create reliable fuses, the electronics for improved sonar, and the training programs to teach crews effective employment. Allied industrial superiority, protected by the Atlantic Ocean from strategic bombing, enabled them to field weapons that German industry simply could not match. The evolution of the Hedgehog continued beyond its World War II success. The weapon remained in service with various navies well into the Cold War era. The Royal Navy employed Hedgehog on anti-submarine frigates through the 1950s. The US Navy retained the weapon on older destroyer escorts assigned to reserve fleets until the 1960s. Several navies, including those of Argentina, Colombia, and Pakistan, operated Hedgehog-equipped vessels into the 1970s. The tactical principles Hedgehog embodied influenced post-war anti-submarine weapon development. The forward-throwing concept evolved into more sophisticated systems like the Limbo 3-barrel depth-charge mortar employed by the Royal Navy, and eventually into rocket-propelled torpedoes like ASROC that could deliver homing torpedoes to target areas miles from the launching ship. Every modern forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon traces its conceptual ancestry to the Hedgehog. The psychological warfare aspect of Hedgehog, the terror created by silent weapons that exploded only on contact, influenced Cold War-era naval tactics. Soviet submarine commanders during the Cold War expressed in post-Soviet interviews the same psychological concerns their German and Japanese predecessors had articulated. The knowledge that NATO anti-submarine forces possessed weapons that provided no warning before impact, modern versions of Hedgehog's contact-fused projectiles, created constant tension during patrol operations. The Battle of the Atlantic, which Hedgehog helped decisively win, represented more than military victory. It ensured the survival of Britain during the darkest days of 1940 to 1941. It enabled the massive build-up of American forces in England that made D-Day possible. It guaranteed the continuous flow of supplies that sustained the Soviet Union after Operation Barbarossa. Without victory in the Atlantic, achieved through technological innovation like Hedgehog combined with intelligence, training, and industrial capacity, the liberation of Europe would have been impossible. For the German submarine crews who faced Hedgehog in combat, the weapon embodied their worst nightmare. An enemy technology they could not counter, could not evade through skill, and could not defeat through courage. The splashes of 24 projectiles entering the water became the sound of death approaching, silent and invisible, striking without warning. In those final seconds, as projectiles plummeted toward the hull at 7 meters per second, there was nothing to do but wait. I hope that probability favors survival. Pray that all 24 projectiles missed the 30-meter circle that encompassed your boat. For most, those prayers went unanswered. The explosion, when it came, meant instant catastrophe. The flooding that followed meant certain death. 35 pounds of Torpex, detonated against the pressure hull at contact, created a breach that no damage control technique could seal. The submarine settled into the depths, taking its crew with it. 50 or 60 men drowned in superheated darkness, knowing their final moments would be spent in absolute terror as the pressure hull collapsed and the Atlantic claimed another crew. The mathematics were unforgiving. The physics were absolute. The Hedgehog, a weapon that seemed almost simple in concept, 24 projectiles fired forward in a circle, had transformed submarine warfare from a contest of skill into a problem of statistical probability. And in that transformation, it had helped break the back of the German U-boat force, turning the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic from desperate defensive struggle to methodical Allied victory. Kapitän-Leutnant Detlev Krankenhagen, whose final moments we glimpsed at the beginning of this story, understood this truth in the seconds before Eugene E. Elmore's 9th Hedgehog salvo found U-549. He had evaded 8 previous attacks through skill, courage, and determination. But skill meant nothing against an opponent who could fire again and again and again, each attack refining the targeting solution, each miss providing data for the next attempt. Mathematics had become inevitable. The statistical circle was closing. When the projectiles struck, punching through U-549's pressure hull at 280 meters depth, Krankenhagen and his crew of 57 had perhaps 3 minutes before the boat imploded. There would be no time for final letters, no opportunity for prayers, no chance to abandon ship, just the roar of flooding water, the searing heat of pressurized air, and the darkness closing in. They died knowing they had faced a weapon against which courage provided no defense and skill offered no advantage. They had faced the Hedgehog, Death Rain, 24 projectiles that exploded only on contact, and the contact had come. The legacy of those 24 mortars, fired in 2 seconds, creating a circle of death 30 meters across, extended far beyond the immediate tactical victories they achieved. The weapon represented a fundamental shift in military technology, from weapons that announced their presence to weapons that struck silently. From weapons that scattered destruction broadly to weapons that delivered precision lethality, from weapons that provided warning to weapons that gave none. It was a shift that would define modern warfare, where guided missiles strike without warning, where submarines launch weapons from hundreds of miles away, where death arrives silently and precisely. The Hedgehog was among the first weapons to embody these principles. Those German U-boat crews who heard the distinctive sound of 24 small splashes, followed by terrible silence, were among the first to experience warfare's new reality. They were not the last. Every military conflict since World War II has featured weapons that strike without warning, that explode only on contact, that reduce survival to statistical probability. The Hedgehog pointed the way toward this future, demonstrating that technological superiority, properly applied, could overcome courage, skill, and determination. It proved that in modern warfare, the side with better science, better engineering, and better mathematics would prevail regardless of the enemy's bravery. For the Allied sailors who operated Hedgehog, the weapon represented hope. Every attack that resulted in silence meant the submarine still threatened their convoy, but also meant another chance to fire. Every explosion that echoed through the sonar headphones meant a U-boat sunk and 50 Allied sailors who would not be torpedoed. The weapon gave them agency in a battle where merchant sailors died helplessly when torpedoes struck, where escort crews had previously fought blind. For German submariners, it represented despair, the knowledge that Allied technological superiority had created weapons they could not counter, that no amount of training or courage could overcome. The understanding that every patrol might end with 24 projectiles creating a circle of death around their boat, and that survival depended on luck rather than skill. That psychological burden, carried by 40,000 men through the war's final years, contributed to the 75% casualty rate that made U-boat service the deadliest military assignment of World War II. The story of the Hedgehog is ultimately a story about innovation, industrial capacity, and the transformation of warfare through technology. It demonstrates how a relatively simple weapon, conceptually little more than 24 mortars fired forward instead of dropped astern, could fundamentally alter tactical equations when it solved the right problem. The problem was not how to create more powerful explosions. Depth charges already delivered tremendous explosive force. The problem was how to attack while maintaining contact, how to provide immediate feedback, and how to remove the cushion of water that protected submarines from near-miss explosions. The Hedgehog solved these problems through forward-throwing geometry, contact fusing, and pattern design that matched target dimensions. In solving them, it created a weapon that terrified the men it was designed to kill, that psychologically broke submarine crews before it physically destroyed their boats, that transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from a desperate defensive struggle into a methodical Allied victory. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.